Are you ready for another episode of Keeping It Real with Jac and Ral?
I'm definitely not a perfectionist.
No, I can tell.
If I was, I wouldn't be sitting here with you.
Jack Phillips and Gabriel Dolan are not your average podcast hosts. Every Monday, they start your week off with interesting stories, personal experiences, great advice, and a plethora of ideas you can use to learn, laugh, and leverage at work. So get ready, people. It's time to take a big sip of Keeping It Real with Jac and Ral.
Keeping It Real with Jac and
Ral.
Welcome back. Hey, favourite topic of mine, this one.
You forgot to do the formal introduction again. How often, this is mate.
My name's Jac Phillips.
And I am Gabriel Dolan.
Also known as
Ral.
And we are Keeping It
Real with Jac and Ral.
Are you happy now?
Yes.
Can we move on?
Go on. That,
Good example.
Clearly wasn't perfect, which leads us into...
Gosh, she's good. You should do podcasts. This episode is about perfection. In fact, it's not about perfection. It's about progress, and progress being better than perfection.
I mean, seriously, we could have redid that intro, but why would you? Because it's a waste of bloody time. Anyway, more on that later. So, perfection. What comes to mind, Jac, when you hear about perfection or perfect?
Chardonnay. Pretty perfect.
And chips.
And chips. What sort of chips? Halloumi chips?
No. Like potato crisp, salt and vinegar. You know,
Yum. No, I'm
cheddar,
hungry.
cheese, type stuff.
Perfection. What comes to mind? Well, probably negative things, actually. Unrealistic, unattainable, unachievable, time wasting. That's what I think when I think perfection. I'm definitely not a perfectionist.
No, I can tell.
If I was, I wouldn't be sitting here with you.
It's like, no shit, Sherlock. I'm not a perfectionist either. It's probably why. I mean, imagine if one of us was a perfectionist.
We wouldn't be sitting here now.
We wouldn't be sitting here.
You'd do my head in, or I'd do your head in.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, we wouldn't be, one of us would be over-scripting or go, no, you didn't say that properly, do it again.
Well,
No.
look how quickly we've pulled this together, and it probably sounds like it too, and it probably looks like it. But the point is, it's about keeping it real, right?
Yeah.
And we can't do that if we want to be perfect, because we would never, well, first of all, perfect isn't real.
No, real isn't perfect.
Real isn't perfect.
I often say that real leaders aren't perfect leaders aren't real.
Say that again.
I know, yeah, it's good. It's worth repeating, is that real leaders aren't perfect leaders aren't real.
So true.
And I think, why would you try to be perfect? Because your perfect is not someone else's perfect.
Why would you want to be perfect? What would drive that? Where would that come from?
That's deep. That wasn't in the script, that question.
No,
Might
that
throw
wasn't
me a
in the
bit.
script.
But I think, so first of all, I agree. The nowadays perfection's seen as a negative thing. Like if someone said they're a perfectionist, that is not a compliment
No, it's
anymore.
not.
It is not a compliment. Because if someone said they're a perfectionist, what would come to mind is they're overly detailed about stuff that probably no one cares about.
That's the point.
Therefore, spending a lot of time doing stuff that doesn't add any real value. So I would say perfectionism is a negative thing. And we've talked about, in the previous episodes we've talked about just do it and be ready enough.
Yep.
Because it doesn't have to be perfect.
There is no perfect. There's only progress.
Yes.
Can you think of a good story?
I can think of lots of good stories. I do want to talk about. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown.
She's awesome.
She talks about first fucking times. See, we're not swearing. We're not swearing if we quote someone else.
Quotable.
And I think, the first time you do stuff will not be perfect.
True.
There's always the first. You got to go, okay, this is the first fucking time I've done it. So it's going to be messy. It's going to be all right, but it's progress. So it's
True.
Just
True.
starting.
In fact, the first will always be your worst. Ask anyone who's been married more than once.
Yes. Good.
Not that I've been married
point.
more than once.
No. But you're right. It was like,
Once was
why would you wait for it to be perfect? And there's going to be heaps of times when, enough enough is good enough. Near enough is good enough.
Good is enough. I agree. Totally agree. We spoke in a previous episode about time and how, finite that is. And so if you're trying to be perfect all of the time, then you're going to have less time to focus on the stuff that actually really matters. You were telling me a great story the other day about a guy that was listening or watching a presentation and he was critiquing the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so he helps people with PowerPoints and speaking. And he said he was sitting there in the audience and there was this speaker and he goes, the speaker was amazing and he had great content and he spoke really well and his slides were terrible. And he was talking about how terrible the slides were because he's obsessed about fonts and
Detail.
the detail like that. And then he was speaking to someone in the crowd and the crowd said, oh, my God, that guy was so good and wasn't his PowerPoints brilliant? It's just like – so it's like you don't want to obsess about things that are really important to you. And I'm not, just on PowerPoints. I see people spending hours and hours and hours on PowerPoint slides and they took because they want it to be perfect. And this is what I mean. But your perfect might be not perfect for someone else.
Somebody
First
else.
of all, oh God, if we could just –
Eradicate PowerPoint.
Yeah, like imagine how many hours the corporate world would save if PowerPoints weren't used. But spending so much time on them. Now, we're not saying just put shit out there and you don't want to be doing that.
No,
but I think the 80-20 rule where 80% is good enough.
That reminds me of another number that you gave me years ago. We were giggling. I think we were at Harvard together and we were talking about passing an exam. And I said to you, I wonder what we'll get, what our result will be for this exam. And you said to me, well, quite frankly, anything over 50% is inefficient. I've never forgotten that.
Well,
That's
it's
a
true.
beauty.
It's true. So first of all, well done on you mentioning Harvard.
Keeping it real, Jac and Ral.
Yeah. Oh my God, I
was
can't believe
fun.
it's actually taken this many episodes for us to
that's
mention the fact that we've been to Harvard. Well, I've been to Harvard twice. Just not that it's
And how did you go at school, Ral?
So I'm glad you remembered my little efficiency quote because I do not advocate that this is good advice. So I'm actually going to give advice, but say don't take this advice.
So why give it? You actually want people to
it's
take
funny.
it.
I want to give it. I want people.
It's
to
good
give
advice.
I
It's
want
great
people to take
advice.
it. I always thought 50% was a pass.
It is.
And anything above that was a wasted effort. And I took that philosophy at school. So again, I'm so glad my children did not take this philosophy. So I took that philosophy at school. 50% is a pass.
Yep, I'm through.
Anything less is a waste of time.
I agree.
It almost worked perfectly
Until
I got 49%.
what was the subject?
English.
Get out.
And in the words of Maxwell Smart, I missed it by that much, but I failed English. Can
You're
you believe that?
Author of 6 books.
I know.
You present on communication and storytelling.
That just goes to show what would
teacher
English
know?
teacher know? Yeah. I actually had to go back to my old school. I got invited back to give the keynote address at the graduation, and so clearly the topic of my speech was don't let the results define you over the neck because they don't. And I think this is almost the best compliment. Afterwards, this woman came up and she introduced herself. She said, I've been teaching here for 15 years. I'm the English teacher. And she said, this is the best speech we've ever had.
Because it's real.
And then she said, if you were in my English class, I would have passed you. Aww. So I've passed.
You've passed. I think you've proven that already. But it's a good point. It's a good thing to remember. People beat themselves up over silly things. Kids beat themselves up over school and exams and VCE and, all the NAP plan and all this nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's important to try. It's, don't be a wanker and not do anything.
Yeah.
Give it a go. But everyone's good at stuff.
Yeah.
They really are. And you get better at stuff the more you do, right? So progress over perfection.
Absolutely. So I would have, you and I have been around, not our first
Just
rodeo on stuff. And I would, people who want to start their own career or start their own business and they look at me and I go, well, don't compare your day one to I've been doing this for, 19 years now. So don't make that comparison because when I first, did stuff, like the first time you do stuff will not work. So I look at the first book I wrote and it's just like, that I can see why I probably failed English.
Nothing wrong with that book, by the way. I've read it.
No, I know,
I'm
but
featured in it.
it's like
Bloody good.
going back to the Brene Browns. Just acknowledge it's your first fucking time.
Absolutely.
Like how many when you're a parent? Like oh my god, I remember like. We talked again in a previous episode, you're never ready, but you're ready enough. I still remember this time, Alex had really bad nappy rash, probably because I wasn't wiping her bum properly or anything.
Probably.
And I remember I was on the phone to my sister, and I was on the phone to my sister as I was changing Alex's nappy. And I go, oh, she's got really bad nappy rash on. I just got to put some cream on it. And I put some cream on it, and then Alex just started screaming, screaming. And I'm going, oh, my God. And my sister Terry goes, there wasn't tea tree oil in that cream, was there? And I went, oh, yes, there was. I was like, got to go, put her in the bath. I mean, how many...
Easy to do. I've made stupid mistakes like that. When I was breastfeeding Maddie, our firstborn, look, I might have had a little bit of constipation. So my darling mother, in all her wisdom, said, don't worry, darling, I know you can't take any drugs because you're breastfeeding. It'll go straight through you. I'll make you some bran muffins, my famous bran muffins. I said, brilliant. They always worked. So consumed said bran muffins. About a day later, Madeline does her usual vomit after a breastfeed because she was well topped up. And what she vomited looked like it had blood in it. It was the scariest, the worst thing. I panicked, Mum panicked, Richard panicked, straight to the hospital. I carried the nappy that I used to wear over my shoulder that she'd vomited on. And the doctor took one look at her and one look at me, and they put the nappy under the microscope. He said, who's had bran in their diet? Because bran mixed with carrot and other things comes out looking a bit like sort of red blood.
Right.
So there was nothing wrong with any of us.
Okay.
I
had no idea where that story was going.
Well, the point is
and I'm
it was
thinking,
progress, not perfection. I learned and realised really quickly I had been doing everything right. I hadn't been doing anything wrong. And even if I'd done it wrong, it wasn't death-defying.
Right. I thought the point of that story was you're full of shit.
Well, I was for a while.
Did the brand work on you?
Lynn's bran muffins. Everything comes out.
Okay, and so can I just say that's not your fault, that's your mother's fault.
It's nobody's fault at all.
No, nobody's fault at all. That's
So
right.
no, it's about progress. Hey, one of my favourite tips is 555. I think I've told you this before.
You have. I love your 555.
It's a beauty.
Tell us about it.
555. So when something goes wrong and it hasn't worked to the perfection you expected it to or wanted it to, ask yourself, will it matter in 5 minutes? Sometimes, yes. Will it matter in 5 hours? Yep, maybe it will. You'll still be seething. Will it matter in 5 days? Unlikely. So much other shit's happened between now and then. Will it matter in 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years? Put stuff into perspective. And I think this is what you were talking about at the start. The importance of actually just recognising there is no perfection. There's only progress. And good is good enough.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break.
Yeah, and I agree. Good is good enough. And it was like, I often see when people are, and this is my opinion of when people go, oh, no, I didn't do that. I just want it to be perfect. I want it to be perfect. I think that's a very convenient story,
Cop-out.
them telling it. Yeah, it's a cop-out.
Cop-out.
Because they're too scared to put it out there.
Fear. A life lived in fear is a life half lived. Don't you love that line?
Baz Luhrmann.
Strictly Ballroom.
Strictly Ballroom. One
A
of my
life
favourite movies.
lived in fear is a life half lived.
Yeah.
Who wants to live half a life?
No one.
No.
Okay, Jac. So let's get practical. Let's do some stuff because there's some people probably out there who probably know they're perfectionists, so they might identify and they probably listen to us. I'm sure they're not, what we're telling them is nothing new. They probably know that this is not efficient with their time. You would coach a lot of people on this. So what's some practical stuff you think you could do for the people that are aware, they're perfectionists, but what could you give them?
One of the things I've found, human nature, everyone loves to learn. Yeah, we like to be better. We like to progress, okay? We don't want to be perfect, but we want to progress. So one of my favourite lines is, if you're not winning, you're learning. So when you are beating yourself up as a perfectionist over something that you're not doing right or you're not doing it quick enough or you're not doing it perfectly, step back and say to yourself, am I learning anything from this? What am I learning? If I'm not learning anything from it, I shouldn't be spending much more time on it. Or if I have learned that I'm not very good at what I'm doing and it's causing me lots of grief, then is it really worth me doing? Is it something I want to do? If it's something I have to do, can I get some help? Do I have to do it by myself? Don't need to be alone. So if you're not winning, you're learning. That would be one of the things I coach on the most. Help people with perspective. What about you?
Well, I'm going to say, before I'm going to give you more time to think about stuff, I should just mention, if you're noticing trains in the background or trucks going along,
Digger walking in.
digger barking, stuff like that, we're doing this from my home studio. Well, it's just a room. That's a studio now because it's real. So yeah, I was going to say sorry about that, but we're not sorry.
No.
It's real.
It's real.
Again, we talked about when your whole thing is about keeping it real, it doesn't have to be perfect.
And this is not perfect.
This is
but
not
it's
perfect.
good enough.
So we
like it.
could have done it in a podcast studio. We could have. We decided not to.
Correct.
So just, that's just a little heads up about those little trains.
We do have a real producer though.
We do have a real producer.
Go Keelan.
Go Keelan. So that's, if you're hearing little ding, ding, dings in the background, stuff like that.
Your practical tip.
My practical tip, I think, is to set a time limit. So if you're working on something and you go, okay, this should only take me about an hour or whatever, set the time, go, done.
Fix.
And because I think if you don't do that, then you fall into, the photo's not right or it just needs another edit.
Never get done.
And it will never get done. And I think realising, always coming back to, am I just procrastinating because I don't want to put it out there? So this fear thing, the stuff we spoke about last time, what's the worst can happen, but a time limit, I think a time limit's a really practical one.
I like that. It's just reminded me of a coaching session I actually had just last week with somebody, and we were talking about this very subject. And they had spent an incredible amount of time on a report. And that report was for an audience, but the person who was doing the report, the person I was coaching, actually wasn't doing it for the audience. They were doing it for their boss. They were trying to impress their boss and show their boss how good they were. And the moral of the story was they spent way too long on the report. They delivered the report. It was well received, well liked. And when this person asked their boss for feedback, the boss said, I think you did a really great job, but I've got a feeling you spent too much time on that report. Moral of the story, check in. And we were talking about this and I said, what would you do differently next time? And she said, next time I'm going to think about who my real audience is. But if I'm still concerned about what my boss thinks, I'm going to check in early. Hey, I'm doing this. Here's how it's looking. Any input, any feedback along the way. Because I probably could have spent at least 2 hours less on the report that wasn't even for the boss.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Like if you're
Comes
doing
back to your
something,
time.
I mean, I've my executive manager, she will, if I give her some work, she will often say, hey, Ral, more than happy to do this, but just letting you know that this is probably going to take about 6 hours. And sometimes I go, oh my God, I didn't
know it would take that long.
And then it's like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't need it.
No.
So, so good tips. Any other practical tips?
I'm getting hungry. I think it's lunchtime.
Yeah, could be. Okay. So there we go. That's it. 80-20 rule's good enough. So the tips, final tips we're wrapping up. 80-20 rule, 80% is not always good enough, We're not doing, don't do the 50%. I truly don't take that advice.
I love it.
I know.
Think about efficiency though. I think there's something about
okay.
efficiency.
There's probably some
5-5-5?
aspects. Yeah, there's probably aspects you could do 50. I love your 5-5-5. So will it matter in 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, whatever? Will it matter? Don't worry about it.
Put perspective into your perfectionism. Who are you really pleasing? Think about that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's really good. Why am I doing this? And normally it's like you're probably doing it for yourself. Your perfect is not other people's perfect.
Correct.
I think just perfection, aiming for perfection is a complete waste of time and it is completely unattainable. It's not realistic. So stop trying to do it. So progress instead.
Progress is good. If you're not winning, you're learning. We love to learn.
Love to learn. Love that. Okay, folks, Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, 5 stars as always. Give us 5 stars. Even if it wasn't perfect, still give us 5 stars. And as usual, if you want to watch us, we are on Spotify and YouTube. And again, as usual, the questions, Jac, what do people have to do?
Send us in your questions and tell us what you want us to talk to you about. Yeah. Share some feedback. Help us become a little bit perfect.
Yeah. No such thing as a stupid question. Well, there is such thing as a stupid question, but we will answer it anyway. Okay, this has been another episode of Keeping It Real with
Jac and Ral.
You've been listening to another episode of Keeping It Real with Jac and Ral. If you like what you've heard, don't forget to tell others about it and give a 5-star review. They may seem confident, but they really are sensitive 5-star needy souls. Yeah, right. Keeping It Real, created by Jac Phillips and Gabriel Dolan. Produced by Keelan Ferrari Brown. And this really real voiceover, spoken by Richard Phillips.